Smelleff, the Scent of Secrets. Chapter 1, The Day the Smell Died. It began with the bread. That morning in Barnloch, a town that had never truly woken without the scent of crust and yeast unfurling from oven doors, the air was hollow. The bakery's window was steamed as always, and the loaves were golden, warm, split just enough to hint at their softness inside. But no scent greeted the townsfolk who gathered outside, clutching coins and wicker baskets. The steam was empty. The air was empty. Elsewhere, roses stood in bloom, but their petals no longer whispered of spring. The docks, usually rich with salt and kelp, were dull and odorless. Even the sheep, whose scent of lanolin and earth was as much a part of the hills as fog and rain, were blank. No one said anything at first. They sniffed. They laughed nervously. Perhaps it was the wind. Perhaps a late frost had numbed the nose. But the baker's wife wept when she held a warm bun to her face and felt nothing. The constable swore. The florist stared at her daffodils as if they'd betrayed her. Someone screamed when their baby's diaper didn't smell at all. By noon, the streets were thick with unease, like mist pressed too close to the skin. They called it the hollowing. Later, they would call it a curse, but Emery Smelleff had smelled it coming. He lived at the edge of town, in the mansion known as Fogand Hall, a 3-story relic draped in ivy and decay, where crows nested in the chimney and moss had overtaken the marble lions by the gate. The townspeople whispered that Emery never left. They said he spoke to glass jars, that he could smell sin, that he hadn't touched another soul in 30 years. Only half of that was true. That morning, Emery woke before the clock chimed 6. The fog, as always, pooled thick against the window panes. He rose slowly, like parchment unfurling. His limbs ached from a night of dreamless sleep. He moved without lighting a lamp. He didn't need one. Not yet. He stepped into his scent vault. The vault had no windows, only shelves. Shelves filled with vials, corked and labeled by date and memory. Rain Tuesday, Mother's Lullaby. June, Father's Pipe. First Betrayal, Bitter and Warm. He passed each one with reverence, his long fingers grazing their glass necks as if they were spines of sacred texts. Then he stopped at the newest vial, blank, still unmarked. He uncorked it. The scent struck him like a slap. Not perfume, not spice, not something you'd bottle willingly. It was grief, ancient, tangled with damp soil and the distant tang of ash. And yet it was oddly familiar. He reeled, staggered slightly, then steadied himself on the work table. Outside, bells rang from St. Lyria's steeple. He paused, sniffed again. There was something wrong. He opened the shutters. No lavender from the garden. No pine from the woods. Not even the usual sharpness of chimney soot curling through the fog. The world outside his window was scentless. Emery's stomach twisted. He lit a candle, lavender, handmade. Nothing. He struck a match, no sulfur. He opened a drawer and pulled out a vial labeled Rot Cellar, 1892. He opened it, held it beneath his nose. Nothing. The scent was gone from the world. Not his nose. He could still smell that scent, the one from the unmarked vial. But everything else was void, as if the world had inhaled deeply and forgotten to breathe again. Later, much later, they would come to him. Children clutching wilted flowers that smelled like nothing. Housewives pressing cloves and lemons into his hands with tears in their eyes. Men with furrowed brows and fists clenched around handkerchiefs that once carried the scent of lost wives. They would come to him because of who he was, because of what he could still smell. But that morning, Emery simply sat at his work table, watching the mist unroll itself like gauze over the town. He opened a notebook and dipped his pen. On April 3rd, the world has lost its scent. I have not. And this suggests divergence, internal versus external. One aroma persists, the new vial. Emotional resonance, grief, ash, iron. Conclusion, something has begun. And it is not finished. He paused. Outside, a dog barked. A child called a name. A bird flapped away from the gutter. Then silence. Even the fog seemed to hold its breath. Emery sniffed again. The scent from the vial had changed. Slightly. Now it carried something sharper. Metallic, like blood or something that remembered it. He corked the vial, slowly, carefully. Then he whispered, more to himself than to the room. They've started taking things. His breath fogged the glass before him. Outside, in Barnloch, someone began to scream. Chapter 2. The Boy and the Basil. Long before the hollowing, before Barnloch lost its breath, and the townspeople lost their names to scentless days, Emery Smelleff was a boy in a house filled with silence and herbs. He was 8 years old the first time he understood he was different. Not in the way boys often feel different, because of crooked teeth or strange hobbies or the way they flinch from other children's games. No, Emery's difference was born in his nose. More precisely in what his nose could do that no one else's could. It began with basil, not dried or crumbled, but fresh. A living thing in a clay pot with dark, sun-glossed leaves that breathed green into the air. It sat on the windowsill of the kitchen, just above the sink, where sunlight touched it each morning like a priest's blessing. Emery had always noticed it in passing, how his mother would pinch a leaf, bruise it slightly between her fingers, and toss it into stews or soups. He never thought to smell it, not truly, not until that day. His father had died the week before. A stroke, they said, though the boy only understood it as he left. And no one had the courage to say goodbye. The house grew quieter, heavier. His mother moved through rooms like a shadow stretched too thin. The curtains stayed closed. The clocks kept time but lost rhythm. And the basil was forgotten. Emery found it on a Wednesday. The kitchen was dim and cool. Rain ticked against the window pane like soft knuckles. The basil had begun to wilt, slumping sideways in its pot as if mourning. He stood on a chair and leaned close. He didn't mean to smell it, he just did. And the moment he did, the world opened. Not like a door, more like a trapdoor. A sudden drop into something vast and unexplainable. The scent hit him with a memory not entirely his own. Sunlight on his mother's hair, the tremble in her throat when she laughed. His father's hands, calloused and stained with earth, lifting him high into the orchard air. Basil and pine in the wind. The smell was more than smell. It was a place, a feeling, a truth. He gasped. The chair rocked under him and he fell. His mother rushed in at the sound of the crash, but Emery didn't cry. He was too stunned. "Mama?" he whispered, sitting up on the floor. The basil remembers him. She stared at him, not in anger, in something closer to fear. "What did you say?" "He's in the leaves," Emery said. "He's not gone." She didn't reply. Her hands trembled as she helped him up. She took the basil pot away that night and replaced it with geraniums that smelled like nothing. Years later, Emery would look back and realize that was the first time he read scent. Not just as perfume or spice or rot, but as story, as echo, as proof that emotions had residue. That truth left trails in the air. He would also remember how quickly his mother had locked it away. She never spoke of it, never let him near the garden again without gloves. She began scrubbing everything. Bleach, vinegar, boiling water, until the house reeked of artificial blankness. She thought she was protecting him. In her way, she was. But she was also bearing something vital. Because in the weeks that followed, Emery began to smell things no one else could. A lie on the lips of his teacher, guilt in the pockets of his cousin, loneliness in the scarf his mother wore for 3 days without washing. And basil. Always basil. It came to him in dreams, in school books, in puddles. It was never just a scent. It was always a message, a memory, a whisper from the past. And it never lied. In the present day, Emery stood in his vault, staring at a single leaf pressed into glass. A relic of that same basil plant, preserved in a frame like a saint's bone. He didn't smell it anymore. He didn't need to. He remembered. And now that the town had gone scentless, now that the world had lost its fragrance and children were going missing, and lies rose like steam from every corner of Barnloch, he knew what he had to do. He knew what he had. He would find the source, not with sight, not with sound, but with the gift he had once been told to bury. The basil had remembered his father. Now Emery would remember the town. Chapter 3. The Smelleff is named. They didn't mean it as a compliment. "Smelleff," someone said under their breath, and the name stuck like a stain. It was the baker's boy who said it first. He was lanky, with soot under his nails and flour in his hair. And when Emery walked past the silent market with his collar turned up and a sprig of wormwood pinned to his chest, the boy leaned toward his friend and muttered, "There goes the Smelleff," and laughed. The friend laughed too. Then another. Then the tanner's apprentice. Then the widow by the butcher's stall who hadn't laughed in 2 months. Soon the whole square seemed to carry the word on its breath, though the breath itself still smelled of nothing. Smelleff. It had weight. Sounded old, like something half-spoken in a fable. It clung. Emery, for his part, didn't flinch. He had been called worse. That week, the mayor held an emergency town meeting in the old chapel, the only building large enough to hold the town's collective dread. The pews creaked beneath bodies that hadn't known community since the scent fled. The air smelled like varnished wood and old wool and anticipation. At least to Emery it did. To everyone else, it was sterile. 3 children are missing, Mayor Riedel began, adjusting the silk knot at his throat. Gone without a trace. No screams, no blood, just vanished. A hush swept the chapel. And this affliction we all suffer, this absence of scent. It cannot be coincidence. Whispers, murmurs, heads nodded. Then Smelleff should speak. The words came from Sister Thalia. She was seated in the back row, hands folded like wings. Her voice cut cleanly through the crowd, and when the people turned to look at her, they saw the nun's eyes fixed not on the mayor, but on Emery. He hadn't noticed her enter. He rarely noticed anyone anymore. But there she was, silent, steady, unreadable. And he sniffed the air, utterly scentless. Emery rose reluctantly. He hadn't stood before a crowd in years. His knees did not like it. His lungs liked it less. "I don't know where the children are," he said flatly, "but I can tell you what lingers where they vanished." No one interrupted. He withdrew a small glass bottle from his coat, a vial of murky liquid that shimmered when turned. Grief, he said, and ash. But more than that, memory. Not human memory, town memory. The kind that lives in walls, in roots, in smoke. Someone near the front sneezed. Reflex. I can follow it, he continued, but I'll need space and time and quiet. He stepped down. He expected mockery, laughter, dismissal, but no one spoke, not even the baker's boy. Later, they whispered again, not in scorn this time. Smelleff, they said, and nodded. The name was no longer insult. It was designation. Back in Fogand Hall, Emery stood before the mirror. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. The stubble made him look more human, and he hated it. He stared at his reflection and repeated it aloud for the first time. Smelleff. It did not feel like a name. Not exactly. It felt like a title, like a torch handed reluctantly into his palm. Outside, the fog thickened, and the wind changed direction. From the east, from where the children had vanished. Emery turned to the vault. He gathered his tools, vials, pipettes, amber jars of powdered roots. He packed them carefully into a satchel lined with cork and velvet. Then he placed one last item into the bag, a sprig of dried basil, the last remnant of a memory that had once opened the world. When he stepped outside, the townsfolk had already begun to whisper again. Not in cruelty, in hope. Smelleff will find them. Smelleff can smell what we've lost. Smelleff knows. And for the first time in many years, Emery didn't walk with his eyes on the ground. He walked into the fog, toward the place where Scent had gone to die.